All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody to our Reuters collaboration at the top law firm leaders and general counsel. My name is Jon Harmon, and I'm the chairman of McGuireWoods. And I have the privilege today of interviewing for this program Matt Cooper. Matt is the general counsel, the worldwide general counsel for Capital One. And we're honored to be able to have him today. I've known Matt for a few years, so I'm looking forward, Matt, to our discussion. Let me ask you this first question, Matt. You know, you've held different roles at Capital One, and you've been, at a big firm too. And I think sometimes for all the firms and folks who are watching this, that, lawyers don't fully appreciate the difference of the GC role, different from when you were head of litigation or in other roles. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure, John, and I appreciate you having me. I think everyone knows the general counsel is the chief legal officer of the company, and in that capacity, sometimes I am the final decision maker on a legal question from my team, but bluntly, that happens pretty rarely because I hire great people, I give them context to give the legal advice they need to give to the business, and most of my time is spent doing a couple things. One is advising the CEO and our business leads on more strategic questions, reputational risk, regulatory risk, thinking about long-term shareholder value, and issues around climate, social issues, governance issues. And I sometimes think basically anyone smart with common sense and some good judgment could do my job. I think they need someone with a law degree to kind of protect the attorney-client privilege. So I'm kind of lucky to, have that license that allows me to have this job. And then the other part of the job is hiring great people and developing a culture where they can be great. And so when I look at my calendar, it's amazing, bluntly, how little time I spend actually giving legal advice. I'd say the one other part of the role that's really important, and I had an early general counsel in the General Electric company where I worked tell me this, and it really surprised me at the time. When I told him I wanted to be a GC one day, and he said the most important skill you need to have as a GC is crisis management. I thought, whoa, how can that be? I thought it would be giving great legal advice, hiring great people, leading good teams. And although you hope not to have many crises, when you do, the GC is an incredibly important part of a crisis management team. And that's a role that I've played occasionally, thankfully once every few years and not all the time. But I would say that's another important part of the job that I didn't really fully internalize as I was coming up the ladder until recently.
Matt, we talked last year a little bit about the crisis of 2020 and the different ways it impacted firms and legal departments, and I want to get to that in a minute, but first, you mentioned in that last answer about talent development, and I know you are very passionate about recruitment and talent development, and you've shared some of your beliefs on ownership mentality. I think you were quoted in Modern Counsel as saying, if you pretend like you own the company, it changes how you work, which I think is a fantastic perspective. What aspects play the biggest role in your mind in the war for talent at Capital One?
Oh my gosh, it's such a big question, John, and I'm constantly recruiting and constantly re-recruiting. I think of retention as a re-recruiting effort. In fact, I spent a couple hours of my day today just calling people on the team that I had heard had done a good job on the matter and wanted to know I appreciated them. And that was an initiative I started after calling one of our attorneys who was leaving to go to a fintech. And I called him up to tell him how sad I was to hear that he was leaving and how good of a job he had done. And if he ever wants to come back, to come back. And it struck me that why should I call someone that's leaving and tell them all that? It's a little bit like waiting for someone's funeral to say something nice about them. So one of the things I've started doing is just constantly re-recruiting our people by giving them encouragement and development along the way. But in terms of recruiting new talent, I do look for that ownership mentality. And I think a law firm is a great example of how this can exhibit itself. There are associates in law firm who think of themselves as, I'm just an employee of this firm. I'm trying to pay off my law school debts, bill as many hours as I need to keep my job. There's another group that's a little more ambitious than that, maybe a lot more ambitious, but still doesn't meet my bar of I want to make partner. But there's another category of people that already pretend like they are a partner. They pretend like they do own the firm. And so when choices are discussed around things like hours or salaries or maybe, where to work during the pandemic, they're not thinking of it just as an employee, but what is in the best interest of the long-term interest of the firm, especially when you think about a law firm. You make partner early in your career. So is that all that you really want to be as a partner? Don't you want to be the best at what you do? And that, and if you work towards being the best at what you do, partner comes with it. So I look for that mentality in a in-house legal hire as well. I listen to people's stories and I listen to how often they say we versus they. A lot of your associates, John, I hired 3 in a row one time, and our relationship partner with you said, Matt, would you quit hiring all my best associates? And I said, would you rather me hire the best associates of your competitors? And he said, no, that's fine. You can keep hiring McGuire lawyers. But when I'm interviewing them, I listen. Do they refer to McGuireWoods as we or they? And the more often they say we, and the more likely I think they are to have an ownership mentality, which to me is just pretending like you own the company, and that brings the passion that I need and the problem solving that we need to go where we want to go.
That's great, Matt. I mean, I was going to ask you, you part answered it. When you're looking for talent, what things do you look for? And it sounds like that's really good practical advice, what they say. Are there other things along the lines that you've noticed with the people in your organization who have the ownership mentality that you look for either before or kind of early on when they're working for you?
Yeah, there is. And by the way, I should say we hire a lot out of law firms, but we also hire a lot out of government as well, and occasionally some public interest, although not as much. Just there's not as much overlap there. But we really look for 4 H's: heart, humility, horsepower, and hustle. And so I kind of write down those 4 H's and I listen for all those things. And I think the biggest one for me is humility. And I look for something different than the common definition of being non-proud, but really someone who is constantly looking for the best answer and is not subject to what you often see in life, especially in lawyers, of confirmation bias, desirability bias, these types of people. Sometimes it's called a soldier mindset versus a seeker mindset, where they develop a point of view and they just find evidence to support their point of view, and they really they're not open-minded to changing their mind. And in a corporation, you really need people who are constantly seeking for the best answer versus just trying to defend the first answer they came up with. And that's hard to suss out in an interview. But certainly those are the people that succeed in our department, in addition to the ownership mentality. So I would mention that. I would mention that as well.
Man, I really like the 4 H's, and you may see that on some McGuireWoods material down the road. I may lift it from you. But in all seriousness, one of the things, we have this opening video and I'm on it for new employees, and it's similar to what you're saying, right? Like I say that it's important to be humble and hungry. And it's so important, to be those 2 things. But you said use the term humility, and we've had discussions before about inclusion. And listening to you describe it, right? Like, to me, and I'd like to hear your take on this, part of being an inclusive leader is being humble, right? Like, because if you're just trying to defend what's been done before, you're not going to listen and want to get the input and include everybody's thoughts, whether you agree with them or not. So I'm wondering what you take about that. I'm going to give you a 2-part question, and then tell me, in your first answer, you were talking about kind of some of the ESG, and I'm wondering, in that space, how important is it for firms to be in alignment with where you are, Capital One, in those things?
Oh my gosh, yeah, 2 really big questions. Let me take the first one first. Boy, there's a couple different ways to approach this. I read a survey of people rating what they think is important in leaders in the United States and in a bunch of other countries. And this survey is done every year by Leadership Institute. And the options are things like inspiring, competent, visionary, strategic, competent. And the number one competency that people look for in a leader every year in every country is honest. And another H, as it turns out, John, maybe we'll have to add that to our list. But when I read that, the reason it struck me is it's really hard to be visionary and intelligent and strategic. It's not hard to be honest. That's just a choice we get to make as leaders. And so my approach, I don't know if you call it humility, I try to be vulnerable, authentic, share with people how I'm thinking. So when we're addressing tough topics, maybe it's Me Too, maybe it's the murder of George Floyd, I will say, I may say the wrong thing. I'm not sure how I have the answers, but I want to share with how I'm thinking about things. And the way I usually say it is not because I think I'm right, but because I want you to know where I am. And that way you'll know how to influence me to get to another place. So if you know exactly where I am on an issue and you think Matt needs to be more forward leaning on that, he needs to say that a different way, he needs to think about that in a different way, I need to be authentic in order to receive that coaching. If I'm just trying to say the politically correct thing or avoid hard conversations, you never really have that kind of interaction with your team that can help you grow. The other thing I try to do, although bluntly not as well, I don't do this as well as I should on the inclusion side. And there's lots of ways to define inclusion, but I want people to feel like their opinions matter, that they're valued, whatever their level in the company is to try to listen to people's ideas before sharing your own. And I think one of the hardest things for me is I'm in a meeting and there's a difficult issue is I give my preliminary view too early. And sometimes I even say something like, well, I just want you to know my view so you can kind of know how to steer the conversation from there if you want to change my mind. But I think sometimes that can shut down the conversation.
That's
because
good, man. Yeah.
So I'm not as good as that as I should, John. It's the thing I'm practicing, being the last one to give a view rather than the first one. So I think I'll mention those couple things. We could probably talk about inclusion for the rest of the interview. On the law firm alignment, I think it's a non-negotiable for us that our law firms be aligned with us on inclusion, on diversity, on values, on all those things. And I really try to look at our firms not as vendors. I just bristle sometimes when I hear other in-house legal departments talk about them that way, or suppliers. I really see them as co-counsel. And if you think about it, John, we've had a couple matters together. I wasn't your client. The corporation was your client. And that's the same client I have. And it's not my CEO, it's not the business leader, it's the corporation. And the long-term interest of the corporation, by the way, not just the short-term interest. But I see outside lawyers as co-counsel of mine, not as a vendor of mine. And we want to make sure we're in the trenches with people that share our values. I'll give you one example on the diversity side, because so much conversation occurs externally about legal departments requiring certain types of metrics from their firms. We look at it as a non-negotiable pass-fail, not as something that we can look the other way on or just pay you less money if you don't meet our bar, which is if you don't align with our values on diversity and inclusion, you're not going to be in our preferred provider network. We have 15 firms in our preferred provider network. We do have a 1-year probationary period because we want firms to kind of learn and get better. But we've kicked out firms who have not met our bar on that dimension because we listen to their story about what they're doing. We look at their statistics and we don't see the commitment that we have internally, and the values don't align. So they're not our firm anymore. It's pass fail. It's a non-negotiable. But that's not the only value. There are others as well, but I thought I'd mention that one just because there's so much written about it.
That's great, Matt. Early on, you were talking about something I really love when you were saying how, good leaders, you used the term re-recruiting, right? Like you look how to not give people roses when they're dead, but while they're still there. And I just remembered as I was thinking, as you were answering that, we worked on a matter for you all. And I remember after it was concluded recently, you sent an email from the lowest person on the team to the highest person on the team, just expressing how thankful you were to everybody on the team. And that's the type of thing, we talk about inclusion and we talk about leadership, but those are the type of things that people, particularly those who are, quote unquote, lower on the totem pole, newer, really, really value. So with that, let me pivot to this question, because we have a lot of, Capital One is viewed as an incredibly innovative, and people just love working there and love, either in Capital One or doing work. But we probably got people who are watching who say, hey, you know what? Matt Cooper, pretty cool guy. I've heard a lot about Capital One. I'd love to work for him. I think it goes without saying that you got to be a good lawyer, right? But there are more good lawyers than you could ever hire. So just give me one thing, Matt. There's somebody who says, you know what? I get it, Matt's the GC, but he used to be head of litigation. What is a distinguisher in your mind for somebody who would catch your eye, or maybe more appropriately, the eye of someone on your team, that they could, at some point do work for Capital One?
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know if you were going to talk about internal hires or external, but we talk so much about internal.
This is extra, yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about external.
Yep.
I don't take it as a given that everyone at a well-known firm is a good lawyer. Maybe they're all good lawyers, but we need great lawyers. So it's not something I just, that's one thing we need to look for, is great lawyers. It's not the only thing, as I'll get to in a minute. But I do want, one thing I've noticed is firms, I was a head of litigation. I was on a panel one time, John, where at one of your competing firms, and they said, do you hire lawyers? Do you hire law firms? And I was the head of litigation, and I said, I hire lawyers, not law firms. I'm looking for the best litigator to win my matter. There was an in-house lawyer from another big company who said, we hire law firms, not lawyers. And of course, that was a crowd pleaser, because you're meeting with a law firm. And I remember thinking that he was kissing up to the crowd. But as I become more senior, I really do think having a firm that has a lot of different areas and capabilities, where they're willing to share work with each other and not just crowd claim the hours, where they're willing to actually refer to another firm. When another firm has more expertise than they do, we look for that kind of commitment to our long-term interest. And I look for people that are intellectually obsessed with the broader picture around the practice that they have. And so that they know the government regulations, they know the government regulators at issue, they know the public press risks of the issue we're dealing with. It could be a discrimination case or a bank regulatory matter, not just the technical legal expertise, but they're really thinking holistically about solving our problem, which can take all kinds of forms, not just great lawyering. Trying to think what else we really look for. And I look for people that are obsessed with us as a company, that know where we see winning, how we're trying to get there. So it helps, that's why we have a preferred provider network, to work with firms that know us well. But we sometimes add firms to that. We sometimes take firms away. I would say those are the things we look for.
Matt, you've talked a little bit about this, but talk to me about how important it is for the lawyers, and I'm talking now about external lawyers.
Yeah.
To kind of really understand your business if they're going to be in deep with you, and how do you go about determining that when you're forming relationships with lawyers and firms?
Well, let's take the hardest case, the first-time lawyer, the lawyer trying to break into our matters, who's never done work for us. So how could they possibly know everything about us? But I'll tell you that, I worked for a judge, and he gave me a secret before I left. He said, Matt, at my old firm, we used to do these beauty contests, and all the other firms would come in and talk about how great they are. He said, I decided I would learn as much as I could about the client, listen to their earnings calls, read their press reports, read all the articles about them, and come in and talk about them, because everyone likes to hear people talk about them rather than about them. Right? No one likes to hear people talk about themselves. They like to hear people talk about them. And so, there are firms who do the homework necessary. They don't get it exactly right because they're not on the inside, but who try to understand us versus just try to explain to us how great they are as a law firm. And so that comes across. I would encourage the other thing that probably more relevant to litigation. Sometimes I get these emails of like, I saw you got sued in Texas, you should hire me. Well, if you say, I had a similar case in front of the same judge you have, I won, here are the arguments we made, or I have a partner, that's the kind of that's the kind of thing that's like going to get you hired. Not, I have a Dallas office and I saw you got hired in Texas.
Yeah.
So the more problem solving that a firm can bring to the potential engagement, and the more they know about us, the better.
Yeah, that's great. We are about out of time. We got about 4 minutes. What I want to do to wrap this up, something one of my directors of marketing suggested, and I love the idea, is a lightning round of questions to you right now. Okay. So I'm going to just give you one or the other, and you have to pick which one is you. And I think this will give our audience just a little bit of insight on Matt Cooper. Okay. So I'm going to run through these, and you have to kind of tell us which one is Matt Cooper. Okay.
All right.
Here's the first one. And some of these I think you may have answered, but let's make sure. Hire lawyers or hire firms?
I'm going to go with firms.
Emails or calls?
Neither. Zoom video calls for my
interesting. By the way, okay, I'm supposed to rattle through these, but I got to ask you your view on after we get past this pandemic. You know, are you going to be traveling more to see your folks? Are you going to be, using Zoom a whole lot more? What's your take? And what's your expectation on your law firms in terms of coming to see you?
I think business travel is going to go down. I think the hotels know this, the airlines know this, but we're going to do more of it than we're doing now. We'll do a mix. Zoom has allowed for incredible team meetings. We've had 27,000 people meetings at Capital One to talk about racial justice, to talk about our strategy. We could never do that in a live environment, but there's something magical about the physical connection and the socializing. So we're going to do a mix of both, but it'll be less travel than pre-pandemic, I believe. And from a law firm perspective, I think it's probably a similar thing. We'll probably do some Zoom video calls that are just as effective than the pre-pandemic physical visits. But I think those physical visits are still going to be helpful too. So I'm going to kind of split that down the middle, John, probably 50-50 compared to pre-pandemic.
Fair. Okay, let me finish up these questions. AFA or hourly rates?
Hourly rates, regrettably. I can't figure out an AFA that I like. So we're mostly hourly rate.
New York or Sonoma?
New York.
Flexible or rigid?
Oh my gosh, flexible.
Law firm rankings have value or have no value?
No value to me, but if you need them to get great lawyers, then you better pay attention to them.
Okay. Washington Football Club or Ravens?
Washington.
Mentor or mentee?
I'm a mentor now, as scary as that sounds, more often.
Books or Audible?
Books. I'm still a hard book reader.
I love this one here. Emotional intelligence or intellectual intelligence?
Oh my gosh, they're both non-negotiable. They're both non-negotiable.
Okay. And then the last question is, and this is somebody who wants to impress Matt Cooper with pitching, a meal or a meeting?
I do it 8 to 8:30 coffee. Any other time, I'm likely to have a meeting that's going to cancel the pitch meeting, and so that's what I've learned to do. 8 to 8:30 coffee. John, that's when you and I had coffee.
That's it. We sure did, right in the middle of last year.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Matt, listen, this has been fantastic. I think our time is up, but thank you for taking time to join us on Collaboration at the Top, Law Firm Leaders in GC. I think folks could really get a lot of what you just said. I know I picked up some things, and don't be surprised if you see those 4 H's floating around here at McGuireWoods. Okay.
John, it was great to see you, and I appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this. So,
great. All right. Take care.
Okay, John.
Bye-bye.